Read Me, Part 5, by KB Hurst. I frantically searched around my house to make sure that the gentleman that was at my home had not stolen the book. What was going to happen now? I was told I had to read all of those stories it afforded me, or else. I knew now that it was no lie. The book had power, one that I could not help but appreciate. The few gifts it had given me, I must now use to find Edmund. Isabella Martin was someone to him. That was the same name from the last story I read. Who was she? Was Edmund that little boy I was reading about? How? I thought all of the people in the stories were dead. Maybe there was something I did not quite understand. I phoned Julia. I only got her voicemail. I tried to think of something to help me. I used my newfound hacking skills to look up Edmund's address. Oddly enough, there was no one by the name or address. Of course. I grieved the loss of the book as though it were a living, breathing thing. I tried numerous times to reach out to Julia, to no avail. All I could do is wait. It was 5 o'clock on the following Friday when I got a knock at the door. I had just put a roast in the oven and poured a glass of wine. I figured it would help with the headache I was growing used to since the loss of the book. Without it in my presence, I had them more frequently, like someone with a hangover. "Robert!" It was Julia. She grabbed me into her petite arms and gave me one hell of a bear hug. "Julia, I tried to call you." "I got your messages. I was unable to return your calls, though. I was having issues with my phone all week. It was a complete disaster, and I knew I would see you, so I wasn't too worried." "Something has happened." "Well, pour me a glass of that red stuff you're drinking and tell me all about it. You look positively white, Robert." "That book you gave me. Where did you get it?" I asked as I poured her a large glass of wine. "Thanks," she smiled at the large glass. "I found it at a flea market. I didn't really know much about it, but the gentleman who sold it to me seemed very intent on getting rid of it. I figured he wanted to make a bit of money. I wasn't cheap, by bartering standards, but I had to get it for you. It just had your name all over it." "Do you by chance know anyone by the name of Isabel Martin?" She looked at me, puzzled for a moment. "Now I'll be. That's a name I haven't heard since I was a wee girl. Isabel Martin is my aunt on my father's side. She ran off and joined the circus and no one ever saw her again." "She ran off?" "Yes, how in the hell do you know about my aunt?" She seemed more amused than concerned. "A gentleman by the name of Edmund Wright came to see me this past week. I believe he's stolen something of value from me. He took that book you gave me. Look, I need it back, Julia." "Oh, well, I don't know anyone by the name of Edmund Wright. How does he know me?" "He knew your aunt. He said you'd know why he came." Julia sat puzzled for a long moment, as though she couldn't figure it out. I had stumped Julia for once. She was always so good at figuring things out. "Did you know your aunt was committed to Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum by her husband?" "No. What does that have to do with this?" She was confused. "I think I need to get to the point. That book you bought me holds great power. I don't think you have any idea how much. But the man you bought it from, did he tell you where he got it from?" "No, he didn't give me any information. Wait, he did say that the next owner would be pleased with the gifts. I thought it was just bad English. He specifically said gifts, and I recall thinking it was quite strange." "The book gives you gifts if you read the stories." What are you talking about? I explained everything to Julia about the book. I told her about the blood, the fish, the power of thunder, the hacking. I told her about all of it, and then she looked at me very puzzled. What was the last story you read? The one about Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. Who were the characters? Izzy Martin, and a young boy, but he never gave his name. I think we need to go to Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum and ask a few questions, starting with who that boy was. I think it may be connected to that Edmund Wright fellow. Julia and I piled in my old sedan and drove 2 hours to Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. When we got to the building, we had to enter the main doors where a guard asked us for our names and reason for coming. I'm looking up some information on my aunt, who was committed here some years ago, Julia said. Name? Isabel Martin. I'm Julia Spellman. The guard pulled up some information on the computer and then gave us the name of a woman who worked in the main office that handled the patient's data. When we got to the main hall, there was an entrance to a large office where 2 women sat behind glass windows. One of them looked rather stern and looked up at us with her black-rimmed glasses. May I help you? Yes, I was told you might have some information about my aunt that was committed here some years ago. Name? Isabel Martin. Yes. She was committed in 1946 by Mr. Edward Wright. Wait, what? Julia asked. Yes, her husband Edmund committed her. She kept her maiden name when she came in. He was intent on her staying here, it looks like. Said she was the reason their infant son died. I'm sorry, but it looks like your aunt was released in 1962. No further record of her once she was released. I walked up to the window. Ma'am, is there anything on record of any types of jobs she performed while she was here? Does it say she took care of any young children while she was here? I was intent on finding out as much possible so that we could see if the little boy was the key. No, you would not get permission to access those types of records. I'm not authorized to give out information about what sorts of jobs she had. They would have been part of her treatment, and we cannot tell you any more about that. I'm sorry. I looked at Julia, who was even more concerned and confused than before. We walked out of the room and went down the hallway. A man stopped us on our way out. He was in janitor's clothing. I remember your aunt. The man was tall, dark, and aged by either this place or the years he had been alive. It was anyone's guess. They call me Big Red. I knew her. She was a sweet lady. She used to help me with my moods. She would talk to me. That's part of why I'm able to hold down this job, even at my age. The man had to be 90 at least. Do you know what happened to her? Have you heard from her again? No, I reckon she took the chance and got as far away from this place and that mean old husband of hers the second she had a chance. Edmund Wright? It didn't make sense. The Edmund Wright I had met was in his late 50s, not old enough to have been born in the 30s. We turned to look at one another, and when we turned to look at the man, he was gone. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. What on earth? We were silent on the drive back to my place. We weren't sure what to say after everything. I wasn't even sure Julia believed that the book had any real powers at all. It was shortly after midnight when we pulled into my driveway. Julia asked me if I wanted anything to eat. She could make us a couple of sandwiches. I nodded. I had not realized how hungry I was, but the last time I had eaten was at 7 this morning. As we stood in the kitchen itemizing the meats and cheeses I had in my fridge, I felt so angry with myself for letting that book get out of my hands. I was cutting some cheese and bread to make her sandwiches when I accidentally cut myself. Ouch! Oh, well, shit! I exclaimed, annoyed. What's wrong? Julia asked. I just cut myself on that damn bread knife. I didn't realize it was so sharp. Oh, let me see. Then as she went to grab a paper towel to help stop the bleeding, something happened. The blood that was dripping from my fingers seemed to be floating in mid-air. Julia looked at me and turned white. "What on earth, Robert?" I shrugged my shoulders. I watched as the blood floated in the air and then formed into an arrow. It was as though it had a life force all of its own. I followed it down my bookshelf, and large drops began hitting the books randomly. I was in complete awe. Julia looked positively sick. Then I realized that it was using the large letters of the book titles to communicate to me. My blood had activated the book, so why couldn't it work as a sort of compass? I tried to follow the letters, and then figured out they were in order by the books on the top level to the bottom. Edmund lives at 3-4 Manchester Lane in town. I realized it was giving us his address. Julia and I piled into the car, and as she looked up the address using her phone and GPS, we sped out backwards toward Edmund Wright's home. When we got to the house, it was pitch black. No one was home. How in the hell were we going to get that book now? Julia got out of the car and knocked on the door. I followed her, and together we stood on the porch of Edmund Wright. No one answered. I was still perplexed as to what he needed that book to begin with. He had given up his wife since he sent her away. Why would Edmund want that book, unless he was trying to find her? Why, after all this time? There was something mysterious going on, mostly since he was as much younger than he should be. We stood there, and I knocked harder. I took a deep breath. "Julia, no one's here." "Well, we can't give up now," Julia said, trying to open the door. "What are you doing? We can't break in." "Oh, stop being such a scaredy cat." The door didn't open. Julia pulled out a rock from the ground, and just as she was about to throw it through the window, the front window burst. Shards of glass went everywhere. I had to cover my face so that I didn't get glass in my eyes. My first thought was that Edmund had shot a gun through the window when he saw who was at his door. I was terrified now and turned to see if Julia was all right when she pointed behind me, wide-eyed. "What is it?" I turned, and there, floating in mid-air, was the README book. It had escaped all on its own. Well, I'll be damned. "Someone doesn't want you to let go of you so easily, do they?" Julia exclaimed. We both smiled, and after I grabbed the book, got in our car and sped away. A neighbor's dog was barking loudly, but we got away before anyone saw us. When we got home, I sat the book on the coffee table and took a deep breath. It was like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest. "Well, what now?" Julia asked, bringing in 2 plates with sandwiches on them. Still hungry from my lack of food all day, I grabbed my plate greedily. I sat down for a moment, though, to get a good look at the README book. Suddenly, the book opened all by itself. I expected it to tell me the rest of the little boy's story in the lunatic asylum, but it didn't appear as though the book was ready to. Instead, it turned to a story called The Lovers. Julia looked at me and sat down next to me. The book seemed to illuminate before our very eyes. There was now a smell coming off of it, something like roses, chocolate, red wine. I looked at Julia. "Well, I guess I have to tell a story."